Awaiting the arrival of Council Member Englander, who is going to be late. Mr. Koretz will not be here today. I'm Council Member Zine, Chair of the Audits Government Efficiency Committee. This is September 27th. We have 4 items on the agenda, and we're going to take item 1 last. I'm just kidding. Item 1 we'll take first. I want to hear sighs, Controller. Hello. I was just teasing. I was just trying to shake you up. Okay. So let's, Mr. Clerk.
Number one, motion Zine Englander relative to requesting the city attorney to prepare and present an ordinance to amend Los Angeles Administrative Code Section 20.60.4 to require all city departments to report fraud, waste, and abuse, and further instruct the Ethics Commission and personnel departments to include a fraud, waste, and abuse training in their biannual training and related matters. This item has also been referred to the Personnel Committee.
We are waiting for someone to come up on that. I'm ready for you.
Thank you.
I just had a lovely lunch meeting with FBI and U.S. Attorney, so this is a perfect
segue into this.
segue.
Okay. Well, thank you, Mr. Zine, and particularly for your support and introduction of this motion, and really also I know you have a particular interest in ensuring that many of the audit recommendations that we have get implemented, and I appreciate that.
A lot of them were sitting in the collecting dust.
So we're excited about that because there's a number of recommendations, as you know, that will help identify funds that we can use for services to the public, which is critically important. So today your committee is discussing the changes to strengthen the city's fraud, waste, and abuse language in the administrative code. With the city going through difficult times, it unfortunately has created somewhat of a perfect storm for some of these activities to occur, for that fraud, waste, and abuse to occur. And that is what is happening. Of course, we have all read and understand the alleged illegal activities and misappropriation of funds and city resources in building and safety, animal shelters, and now recently even in the fire department. I think give us no option and no choice but to really strengthen, which I've been proposing for a long time, the enforcement and controls for waste, fraud, and abuse. I sent a memo in March, again, to all of the general managers, indicating that it is a citywide fiscal policy for departments to report all losses to the fraud, waste, and abuse unit. This is in place particularly so that any wrongdoing, whether intentional or unintentional, can be addressed immediately. And I think that at the same time we have to do further steps. And particularly, I think what we have found is if there's an experience, and let's just take building and safety, for example, and if, in fact, our waste, fraud, and abuse unit had been notified, we might be able to say, here are some other areas that you should be looking at. This could be happening in another city department. And right now, there is no place where that is occurring, or particularly no requirement that it happens. And I know that people are reluctant until they figured it all out, to report it to somebody, but we think it's important that there be a requirement. So one, our special investigative unit that we have, and Brian is here today that heads up our waste, fraud, and abuse unit. They have expertise and knowledge and can help ensure potentially from preventing anything happen, and also use those experiences as examples when we're trying to change the system. And I think that that preventive measure is particularly important. As your motion indicated, the action that we were talking about is first, the city needs to strengthen the admin code to address the systematic issues to better account for how we spend our taxpayer dollars. And in the motion indicates that the administrative code should be strengthened, requiring all departments to report fraud, waste, and abuse to my office. With that information collected, we can better, I think, assess the risks that are citywide and address them really accordingly, whether it is through an audit or other investigative units. We do work clearly very closely with Personnel Department, with Ethics Commission, and the Los Angeles Police Department on a number of sensitive issues, as well as with the City Attorney's Office. And I think that your pushing this forward would be extremely helpful to the City of Los Angeles. The second recommendation is to institute a requirement that all city employees be trained about the city's policies on the prevention and reporting of waste, fraud, and abuse. And additionally, having better lines of communication. All too often that we have people who say, well, I've known John forever. John's a great guy. He would never do that. or, I've known Kelly for whatever it is, and instead of looking at what the indicators are. And my office provides training, asks the department to send their staff. I went to one of those training, and it really gives some assistance, but we think it needs to be broader than that, and that potentially the online program to help educate our workforce will provide a tremendous payoff for that. We all do ethics training, and we all do sexual harassment training, and I think it's time for us to all have the waste, fraud, and abuse training as well. And I think we could help in that way. It could be given on a annual or biannual basis, so they would know how to look for that waste, fraud, and abuse. And then the last thing that you talked about and have put in your motion as well is making more people aware of our waste, fraud, and abuse hotline. Because we get those phone calls that people are telling us where they've seen something different, and we need to get the public's help in doing that, as well as encouraging city employees to do that. We have added a page to our website that allows Angelenos to recommend departments or programs to be considered for additional audits, or if they've identified waste, fraud, and abuse. And some of our recent audits have particularly been reflective of a call. In fact, one of them with the Department of Transportation was a whistleblower that indicated here were some problems in the Department of Transportation. So we encourage that. We look forward to improving the system and to give a little bit more teeth to it and a requirement. Again, because I think sometimes departments say, I don't really want anyone to know that this happened. I handled it. I sent the person in personnel department and I handled it. Well, we don't learn from that experience. And two, there might also be some other ways to address that. And so we think the requirement, and there's been language that we've provided to you and in the past that we think would be critical. It's very similar to language in the LA County as well, that they have that language for their auditor controller.
Okay, thank you.
And my staff is here today also to answer any questions that you might have.
And the emphasis on prevention, where we learn from one example to the other, but currently there's investigation taking place with the fire department. There was the one with the Department of Transportation, with Department of Water and Power, with Animal Services, with Building Safety. I mean, it just keeps on mounting up, and that department gets embarrassed, the city gets embarrassed, waste, fraud, and abuse, and then it's that's an old story. And then we move on to the next challenge, and the next challenge is another scandal within the city of Los Angeles, which the taxpayers look at us to say, you're the leaders, what are you doing to correct it? You're the controller who brings these issues forward, what are you doing to change it? And I think city employees need to recognize they have an obligation, responsibility to do it and do it right. But talking to the U.S. Attorney and talking to the director for this region of the FBI, there's other things that are brewing, and that's what frightens me. So we need to be very aggressive, and I know you as a controller are very aggressive. The experience as a council member, the experience that you have with those years of experience and knowing what to do and how to do it. But I agree, we have to do more prevention. We need to put more teeth in it, and we need to have consequences for when they do this, and not go to the Civil Service Commission and say, okay, we're going to give you a couple of days off when you're on the take or you're doing something illegal or unethical. But it just troubles me that we seem to have more of these scandals taking place, more of the embarrassment, and the taxpayers say, you're not paving my streets, fixing my sidewalks, trimming the trees, yet you've got these problems taking place. So, and if people don't want to work here, they can obviously go someplace else. So we're on the same page with this, and I commend you for what you've been doing as the controller. And what I want to do as the chair of this committee is to augment that. As you come up with the issues, we have to do the policy changes. And the council, obviously, when we bring them forward, and there has been an extensive delay, not because we've been sitting on it, but there was a delay, things weren't getting done. And I think we're on the same page of moving them forward in a very aggressive fashion. The issue, better help in your office to tackle fraud, waste, and abuse. These codes, you believe, will be beneficial for your office, helping to attack these issues, waste, fraud, and abuse?
Most definitely. Again, knowledge is, as the old saying is, knowledge is information, knowledge is power.
Sounds like Tom LeBlanc.
Yes. And I'm channeling him on that. And it was, that is, and I don't know, Brian and Farrad, if you want to come up, but that kind of information is very, very useful to us, that we know what's happening in a particular department. Prestige parking, which Brian was particularly influential in gathering the data and the information, was very helpful in providing that then to the city attorney's office.
And I think they still owe us millions of dollars, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, probably about $4 million or so right now.
I think the total of all of them is 23 million or somewhere estimated.
It's very high, yes. It's
Yeah.
a large figure that the city could use right now.
So in that instance, again...
And identify yourself, please, Brian.
I'm Brian Young, Special Investigator with the
Okay.
Controller's Office.
Okay, thank you.
It is, knowing that that was happening with one particular parking lot operator, then if you know that's happening, then you can go to the others and look to see maybe it's happening somewhere else. But if you don't know about it, then you can't do anything about it.
Yep.
And so that really is, there needs to be some place in which that information is shared. And I think on a number of our audit recommendations as well, we try to, for example, when we have an audit that may be of a particular department but has citywide implications, we send a letter to the mayor that says, that we did this audit of X department, but it could be happening in other departments as well. So we encourage you to look at those other departments. But again, there isn't the kind of information sharing that we think is critically important in the city to prevent others from happening. I don't know if you both have anything to add, because they're the experts, and Brian's been a long while, but I think this would help you in your operation.
And doing your job, yeah. Which is very important, because every dollar that's going waste, fraud, abuse is a dollar we don't have to do the services that we need to do for the people, with almost a $7 billion budget.
Yes. And as you know, the statistics are that 5 to 7% is lost to waste and fraud. And if you multiply that by $7 billion, that's a lot of money. And
Yeah.
that could cover a large portion of the city's shortfall right there. So, there's no way that you can root out fraud and waste altogether, but you can certainly mitigate it. So having stronger controls, more education, more insight as to the types of things that happen throughout the city, I think it's a win-win for everybody.
I agree. And then what type of training do you think our employees need to better understand? I mean, it seems common sense, waste, fraud, and abuse, but what type of training and the reporting process? So we need to put together a training program. So what type of training? I mean, to me and to you, it's common sense, but obviously some people don't get it. So the type of training that you think we need to incorporate in this?
I'll let Brian unfair, because again, it would probably grow from what we've already done, which is, again, where are some of the red flags that are occurring as to, again, particularly to certain departments, i.e., for example, building and safety. Where were the red flags that you could identify? I don't know, Brian, if you want to give a few examples.
Yeah. Well, we've done fraud awareness training for the last 2 years. I've actually performed it to, I think, about 25 different departments.
To the heads of the departments or the workers?
Mostly mid-managers.
Okay.
So I've probably, trained, a few hundred people. But, obviously to have it online available to more people would be better off, because, we're a very small shop.
Right.
And I can only inform so many people at a time. Usually there's about 20 to 30 people. And it's been very receptive, the training. I mean, it kind of gives people an idea as to the types of red flags. We also discuss, here's the types of investigations we've done in the past. Here's the types of recoveries we've gotten on the procurement area. I mean, there's been millions of dollars that we've actually, established were, so to speak, wasteful expenditures. So it's kind of an eye-opener when I get the word out that, hey, these are the types of things that we can prevent. Here's opportunities that we can mitigate. So the more that we can get the word out, better.
So, for example, so I like P cards, and the use of P cards, and there's been a big issue with Department of Water and Power and other departments. Again, if we learn about where some of those problems are happening, we're able then to share that information with other departments. Here's some things you should be looking at and change policy. So there are certain policies now about where you can't use your P cards, and because there was someone who abused the system.
Right.
But unless you know about that, you can't put those policies in place.
Okay.
Yeah, the training that Brian was referring to was geared toward more supervisor and mid-level managers. What we intend to do as part of our online training is reaching out to individual employees. That is where actually the fraudulent activities are happening. They are the one that they can give us the indication, and I believe that will be very beneficial.
One thing you mentioned, online training, I noticed a notice came out from personnel and employee benefits, so they can do online training for wills and benefits. You may have seen that, and it's going to be on the city time, city computers, and it's coming up. There's a couple training sessions, and I'm looking at that saying, if we can take the time to train someone how to do a will, which really isn't our responsibility, it's our responsibility, waste, fraud, and abuse, and other things dealing with the workplace. And I understand wills and benefits and executors and all that, but why are we doing that on the city clock when this should be a priority to have everyone trained, and we can keep a documentation that they have been trained, they have been noticed, and if they do cross the line and do something wrong, then they've already become aware of it. The police department does that all the time with their training programs. And you've been informed, you're now knowledgeable, you're held accountable. And that's the thing that we talk about, holding them accountable. But it troubled me when I saw this. We're training people on the city clock, on city computers, about preparing wills and things. That's really not a responsibility of the city government. It's nice to do, you want to do that in your own time, but I don't know why we're doing it on the city clock when these other benefits, and then when the employees are doing that, they're not doing their other duties. So I understand it's nice to do, but there's other priorities that we have, and this waste, fraud, and abuse, to me, as it is to you, a major issue. So we want to put together a program. So we need the personnel department. Is the personnel department here? Yes. Come on forward, please. And we're going to use the LMS, Learning Management System.
Correct.
So,
Raylan Napper, Personnel Department.
You are who? You are
Raylan Napper.
Raylan. And you will then work with the controller, ethics, to put together the program out of the personnel department?
Correct. Well, just with the controller, the ethics we discussed in a prior meeting. I think actually we can be helping them with their ethics training and how they deliver that in the future too. But our plan in developing the learning management system was to be the one source of hosting all city training. So this fits in perfectly with our master plan.
Okay. So there are great benefits with that, using that system. And there's just some way we can require all city employees to have that training, that we can document that they've had that training. And if they do cross the line, we have it documented. You know, you knew about it, you did it wrong, and now the consequences are there.
Yes.
Okay. Is ethics here? Come on forward, please. You're the nice man from ethics.
The nice man. I was going to say, yeah.
He is. He's a nice man.
Good afternoon, Council Member.
Good
David
afternoon.
Tristan with the City Ethics Commission. Yes, at a prior meeting, we had discussed that probably in this area of expertise, the Controller's Office would be the department to work with personnel to develop this. We'd obviously be more than glad to work with them and provide input on the training itself, any recommendations that we would have based on our experience, yeah, I mean, that would be something we would definitely be working with. And as a side note, as part of the discussions of one of the items that came up was we are currently doing our online ethics training through software that is being used by ITA, and by hopefully being able to use the new LMS system that personnel has, we would be saving ITA $27,000 annually.
Did you
by
say
not having these.
savings?
Yes.
Did you hear that, Controller?
I heard that.
It's the magic bell.
We live for that.
Excellent. And the city attorney's office here? Because they're going to be responsible. What do you mean you're saying no? You are here. Pete Echeverria.
Pete always says whatever Wendy wants. I think that's...
Well, he's hiding in the back there today. I'm not there. Pete Echeverria from the city attorney's office. We're here to help. Thank you. So, well, that's a good one. We're here joined by my colleague, Councilmember Mitch Englander, who's arrived. So there's two of us. So when we vote on this, we'll send that as a committee report and as a recommendation. So what we want to do is request you, the city attorney, you are the representative from our city attorney, to prepare and present an ordinance to require all departments to report fraud, waste, and abuse under LAAC 20.60.4. Request you, the city attorney, to prepare similar language under LAMC 49.5.18 for the controller to mandate fraud, waste, and abuse training. Request the controller to work with the Department of Personnel to develop online training for fraud, waste, and abuse. Instruct the Ethics Commission Ethics Department with the assistance of the Personnel Department to report back to the Audits and Government Efficiency Committee relative to employee ethics training being operated through Personnel Learning Management System. So bottom line is we want to put this together, this nice package with everybody working together, and then we implement the program, and then we demand that all employees be trained, top to bottom, and then some documentation. So if someone crosses the line, they've been told, they've been warned, they've been trained, and the consequences are there. because it's a zero tolerance when it comes to this situation. Mr. Echeverria, what do you have to say for that?
We're here to help. No, we're happy to work with the controller and the ethics commission to come up with the amendments to the code.
So it's kind of been scattered, and as Brian goes out and does his investigation at one department, Department A, and then we've got similar situations happen in other departments, and we got to put this together. At least, I've always understood, and coming from law enforcement, these are the rules. You follow the rules, everything's fine. You violate the rules, you've been trained, you've been notified, then, there's no sympathy for you.
And the important thing is, again, with the Waste, Fraud, and Abuse Unit and the training that they provide, if something comes in that is more appropriate to go to the Ethics Commission, or we always do that. And similarly, if they get a call that's something that's more appropriate for the Controller's Office, we have a very good working relationship in that way. So there's no duplication of effort. And I think as it was originally created, when I was on the City Council, the Waste, Fraud, and Abuse Unit, that was the important part, is that everyone was cooperating and working together. But I think right now, in many instances, no one knows necessarily until it's already happened, or we hear from it, the LA Times or the Daily News, that they found something. And I think it would be better for us to be able to prevent it from ever happening or growing by knowing ahead of time.
Exactly.
As much as possible.
Exactly. At least we're on the same page. We get the employees, all of them on the same page. And we got great city employees, but sometimes people go sideways, and we have to make sure that that doesn't happen. Mr. Englander.
Thank you, Mr. Zine, and welcome to our city controller.
Thank you.
She's been here before.
Yes. But
Not-
she hasn't
not-
been here
I have
since
not
I've been
since
here,
he's
and that's
been
more
elected,
important. So thank you, Mr. Zine, for yielding the mic to me.
Thank you very much.
I just had a couple questions on this. First of all, I think it's great. My questions really go back to mandating reporting by employees or managers on waste or fraud, and how we do so in implementing the actual day-to-day operations of that. So do we hold them accountable if they don't report, for failure to report? Is that sort of the direction we're going in? I'm just trying to figure out the application of this. The training is great, online training, because we're mandated now to do a lot of other online training, as was stated earlier, which is fantastic. And I think this is going in the right direction. I'm trying to figure out the application part of it and implementation. So how does that work?
And before Pete answers that, so what we are saying is that the departments are required to do that. I think there is a couple of ways. One is asking the mayor to say, okay, this is part of your evaluation as to whether or not you're following the rules of the city, because there are other things they're required to do that should be also, if we're found out they haven't done, that it is part of their daily requirements as a general manager. And so we would engage, I think, the mayor as to how he will ensure that his general managers are doing this as well. But I don't know if there's a legal way in which you can do it as well.
Well, one would be the first step would be to impose that requirement on the general managers, but actually the holding accountable, ultimately, in the imposition of discipline or taking some action if a manager failed to do that, that would be up to the mayor.
Okay, because and trying to figure out where this, and I did a little research on the Business and Ethics Code and where we're at with the state of California, and we've already got a lot of those in place. I think this is great at having something in our local codes here for that. Do we have the ability to go after an employee if they, for failure to report, if they discover fraud, do we have that ability under this proposal to go after them for either penalties or anything like that if they fail to report any fraud? Waste is one thing, and I understand holding general managers, supervisors accountable and support that. But if it's fraud, and it's not the employee that's actually committing the fraud, but it's discovered and not reported.
There are, without more facts, I can't really address it, and actually without more research, I can't really address the criminal aspects of that. For example, there are laws that affect or that address accessories to theft, for example. So putting that aside, the ability to discipline an employee would be the appointing authority. In this instance, it would be the general manager of a department, and the discipline that would be appropriate in this situation would be up to that appointing authority.
Right.
And the city's processes through the Civil Service Commission.
So the ordinance, the next step is the ordinance going to come to council.
Yes.
And then the ordinance, which,
I believe the motion will go to council, and the council will instruct the
Okay.
ordinance be prepared.
yeah, I was going to say, the draft ordinance will then come back.
Correct.
Because it says here in the motion, I therefore move that the city attorney be requested to prepare and present an ordinance to require, and requires bold and underlined, all departments to report fraud, waste, and abuse, which would be tougher language than currently under the LA 20.60.4. And so in the motion where it says require, that's where I'm trying to figure out then what teeth might we have, and hopefully we will, because we've certainly seen our share of scandals in other cities. I think LA is above all that, but when we hear about things going on in Bell and other cities and people committing direct fraud against the taxpayers, it would be great to have some true teeth in an ordinance where we can go after not just managers and supervisors, but failure to report that fraud. And I think it's something that our city controller has done a great job at bringing out through not just audits, but internal investigations, and Wendy Gruhl has done a phenomenal job at bringing that to the table, and I applaud her effort, not only in the city council, but as her controller, being one of the toughest controllers that this city has ever seen. My question, though, is going forward, and I think it's a great idea, which is why I seconded the motion, the word require, I think, really needs to be vetted to give the city some teeth in going after those employees that knowingly don't report fraud.
And the police department has that. An officer is required
Correct.
to report misconduct, whether they're involved directly or it comes to their attention, and there's consequence and discipline for that. So there is a...
Because I don't want, I think my colleague, Mr. Zine, had some really great ideas, and when we were talking about the motion, and actually not just relying on, and this wasn't meant to be grandstanding, it wasn't meant to just have to do a press release, and he really was interested, and as am I, and I know that our controller is extremely interested in this as well, in going after true fraud and holding people accountable, not just looking at, and I'm looking directly at the city attorney's office, for those who are listening and are playing the home game, that we're not just interested in that aspect of it, we're really having an ordinance that we could use, and not just falling back on, well, there are other laws that already deal with those issues, but how we crack down on that and lead by example in the city of Los Angeles. So that's what I'd like to see come back when we have a motion to vote on, an ordinance to vote on in the city council.
And we do that with the department that would draw up charges against an employee for violating an ordinance. And we don't want to be on witch hunts, but the fact is it's got to be fair, it's got to be objective, and you've got to be able, just like a district attorney and city attorney, you've got to have evidence to support that. We don't want to go on witch hunts, but we want to have substantial, and we've already had evidence that there's been some problems, and people may have known or not known, and they didn't take any action. You know, when the FBI comes in and does an investigation on a specific department and arrests people and gets them on videotape, obviously something was going sideways, and where were the supervisors, where were the people who were supposed to keep it honest? So what my colleague is saying is part and parcel of it, but we want to make sure it's fair and balanced so we don't end up having witch hunts. We want to make it objective, and we need to make it fair. But the department would draw the charges up on an individual who is doing something wrong, and it's the ultimate responsibility of the general manager to be a general manager through their supervisors and do their job they're paid for. If not, then we've got to go out and challenge them to do what they need to do.
Right. And there's an area here that we will need to explore as we draft this and as we address it. For example, if it is something that's incumbent, and the obligation, as I understand it, would be placed on every city employee to report fraud, waste, or abuse.
And then the public, if they learn of it, we want them to bring it forward.
Absolutely. Now, there is, I think, already existing an obligation, although it's not expressed specifically in a code section, to do that already, if for a supervisor, for anyone who has the responsibility for overseeing the work. However, just to bring up a random example, if you have an employee who is committing fraud, let's say, and some inkling of that comes to the attention to a low-level line employee who may or may not report it, then the question becomes: is it really the intent to pursue? Let's say it was a custodian or a secretary to pursue them and discipline them for not reporting what somebody higher up in the department may or may not do. This just, and how does our disciplinary system deal with that
And I
type
think
of a
that's the
situation?
intent. I think that's the heart of the spirit of this motion, is to do just that, is that we want to restore public faith and trust into this institution. And to do so, not only do we have to be a friendlier government and a government of the people, but to do so, we also have on the back end to balance that with the fact that we're serious in rooting out true fraud, and everybody's a player in that. And I think that's, and I can reiterate that speech almost verbatim because I've heard, in fact, our controller give it many times and applaud her for it. So I think that's what stands behind this, and I stand behind this motion on that.
Well, I'll give you an example. You're a timekeeper, and your obligation is to put the time in for the employees, and they obviously get paid for that. So you have a timekeeper who is not being accurate, who someone's on vacation, but they're showing them working. Someone just disappears, and you're showing them working. Someone's taking city vehicles that they shouldn't be taking to, Las Vegas for a party or whatever the case may be. That's waste, fraud, and abuse. It's real evident. It's not like you took a pencil and you threw it in the trash can. We're talking about serious consequences. So in that arena, you could be a subordinate to someone else, and you're cognizant, this person's doing something wrong. They're obviously doing something that's illegal, unethical, and immoral, and the city's paying for it. So.
And those were only examples out of Mr. Zine's office, so you can imagine what's going on.
Well, there's a very famous example of misuse of a city vehicle by a council person, for which the person lost the office. So, yes, that does occur.
And then you got the situation.
That's not the council office.
No, it's not. I'm very stingy with the cars. There's a situation with the Coliseum Commission where someone has been and gone, and apparently they charged on a Coliseum credit card for 2 years or something. I mean, that's waste, fraud, and blatant abuse. So we're talking about situations such as that are outrageous. They shouldn't be happening, and they're still happening. So that's why we want to train people. These are the rules. Follow the rules. Everything's fine. If not, then you're going to have some consequences. But to use a city credit card, which I don't think any of us have city credit cards, and to charge, a trip to Las Vegas, we can't do that. Right. It's illegal.
So I think, take the next step from having an ethical and moral obligation to report and make it a responsibility and a legal obligation is what we're looking to do. If there's a way to do that, that's what we're trying to capture.
Controller, anything further? Good.
Music to my ears. Thank you very much. It would be great to have this move forward.
All right, so the recommendation is to approve?
Yes.
So that would be the recommendation, unanimous from the committee on number 1. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Number 2, please.
Number 2, City Controller reports relative to review of city contract number 58169 with Motorola, released in September 2009, and related matters.
And good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Whoever wants to begin.
Well, I'm Cynthia Varela with the Controller's Office. Probably the most logical way is to start with just a brief summary of the report and the audit that we conducted. And then if you have questions for
What was your name?
Department. Cynthia Varela.
Okay, isn't there a Cynthia Varela?
There is a Cynthia Varela.
There is a Cindy Varela.
Is she related?
No.
She's your twin.
We get each other's emails.
If she's listening,
quite often.
she's my scheduler downstairs. She's probably listening in, and I'm going to pay the price for that one.
You should pay the price for that one. All right, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. On September 1st, 2009, the Controller's Office issued its report on a review of the city's contract with Motorola for radio communication equipment. The contract is based on a cooperative purchasing agreement that piggybacks on an LA County contract. The contract was initiated in 2003, and from contract inception through May 2009, payments to Motorola under this contract totaled approximately $40 million citywide.
40 million?
Yes. The primary users of the contract are the Police Department, Fire Department, General Services Department, and the Information Technology Agency. The overall objective of the review was to ensure that departments used the contract and JSD provided oversight of the contract in a consistent manner, and that the processes were in place to ensure compliance with the contract requirements. The scope of our review focused on contract inception, from 2003 to December 31st, 2008, and we looked at the activities that were performed by GSD, police, fire, and ITA relative to their purchases that were made through this contract. Overall, we found that GSD's oversight of the contract required some improvement. And this was based on several key findings that I'll describe. First one dealt with expansion of the purchasing authority for this piggybacking contract. As I indicated, the contract was specifically for the purchase of radio communication equipment. However, we noted that the city expended nearly $4 million on professional services under the contract's purchasing authority. This had been an error on GSD's part as far as adding these types of services to the contract. When we looked at a review of the services that were procured under the contract, we showed that the vendor didn't provide a breakdown or documentation to support their pricing for the services. So rather than the vendor proposals forming the basis for a contract purchase order and subsequent payment, it was simply a lump sum price for the services that were provided. As a result of our audit inquiries into this, GSD added an amendment to the contract which clarified that this contract could no longer be used to procure services. We also noted that the master contract excluded freight charges being added. However, we noted that purchase orders and related encumbered amounts generally included freight charges. In some cases, they were not always billed to the city, but in our limited sample of invoices, we identified freight charges totaling over $1,000 that were paid by the city, and this was just with 3 invoices that we looked at. The total amount actually paid for freight over the life of the contract is unknown. The contract was subsequently amended during our review. GSD corrected and clarified that Motorola's discounted prices already included the freight charges. The second issue dealt with user departments purchasing radios without the required FCC licensing. Most of the departments, ITAs oversees the licensing requirements for the city for using radio equipment. And that generally covers the user departments for fire department and police. But we also noted that GSD and Recreation and Parks also purchased Motorola radios, and they operated on unlicensed frequencies. And so that exposes the city to a risk of substantial fines for that. ITA, as the oversight agency, was unaware that those departments were making those purchases. The third issue dealt with improving communication among GSD and the user departments as needed. What we found is that GSD generally, when they make an amendment to the contract, it's noted on their system, SMS, and the user departments, if they can access the contract, they can see any changes or updates or revisions that are made to the contract. But in the case where there was GSD had determined to disallow procuring services through the Motorola contract, that up to the minute information wasn't available to a department that was going through negotiations at that time, and they were in the late stages of procuring services. So that made a last-minute deletion of those services for that department when they became aware of this amendment. One way that we thought that this could be avoided is utilizing some communication means, either a listserv and notifying departments that there has been a substantial change to a department or an amendment that's been made to the contracts. The audit contains 6 recommendations, and as of our latest status information, as of September 1st, 2011, we found that GSD had implemented 3 of the recommendations. 2 of the recommendations the department disagrees with, and that's one of the recommendations deals with adding language to the contract requiring the vendor to get acknowledgement that the city has complied with licensing requirements, the FCC licensing requirements, and then also actively notifying departments of the contract amendment changes. Those are the 2 that they disagree with. The third recommendation that hasn't been implemented deals with identifying the amount of the incorrect incorrectly charged freight charges, what that total amount is, and requesting a refund from Motorola. The department has indicated in their latest response that due to a lack of resources, this is something that cannot be pursued at this time, and they do not know when they can actually implement that.
Thank you.
Go ahead. Good afternoon, council members. Alfred Lopez, General Services. We did complete our research just last week on the freight charges. We reviewed all the purchase orders that were cut for the contract. We found 417 purchase orders, totaling about $53 million. Out of that, there were 12 of them that had freight charges, and we added them all up. It came out to $4,564.42. And we have referred this to the city attorney for their opinion.
Have you
and
contacted
collection.
Motorola and asked for a refund?
Yes.
What did they say?
We're going to the city attorney to do
I
that.
understand that, but have you contacted them independently of
Not
the city
yet.
attorney? Why not?
yet. We just finished the review last week.
I know, but you found out there's 4,500 plus. Why haven't we contacted Motorola and say, do you want to pay that and avoid litigation and embarrassment, or do you want us to go to the mat?
Yeah, we just haven't done that yet.
Okay, I think we should do that. Give them an opportunity to write the check,
Okay.
and that way we don't have to worry about the city attorney filing action and making an embarrassment in the public, et cetera. You know, they overcharge, they acknowledge the fact. If that's the case, pay the tab, and thank you very much. Otherwise, we'll make a great embarrassment of Motorola for cheating the taxpayers of the city of Los Angeles. So I would suggest we contact them in a professional fashion. This is what it's turned out to be. You want to pay it, or you want to go to the mat?
Okay.
And we'll take it to the mat. Okay, continue, please.
Melissa Uslan for General Services Department. In regards to modifying the contract to include language in regards to the FCC licensing, we have attempted to modify the contract. However, Motorola has not agreed to modifying that contract to include that language. Therefore, we were unable to do so.
So what about this financial penalties for noncompliance, hundreds of thousands of dollars? What about that? So we're
That-
still exposed to that hazard?
No, that has not been addressed.
Okay, we need to address that. See, Motorola's been in business for a long, long time. Who owns Motorola now? Do we know who owns them?
It's still with Motorola.
It hasn't been taken over by some
No,
other
they're
conglomerate?
still under Motorola Incorporated.
And they have a lot of contracts across the country in law enforcement and fire service. And I don't think they need the second largest city in the country to say they're cheating taxpayers and give them a black eye. And I have no problem doing that if we need to do that.
Okay.
So both Mr. England and I are reserve police officers, and we know the communication system and how it works and doesn't work, et cetera. I don't think they need us to go nationwide through our police network saying these are cheating the taxpayers and give them a headache that they really don't need. But we're not opposed to doing that if we need to. And it's documented. And so potential liability of hundreds of thousands of dollars for not complying with the FCC rules is a huge issue. And we are a government that's supposed to follow the rules, not break the law, and then face liability, because ultimately who's going to pay is the taxpayer. So that's a major issue we need to do. What about the difference with the controller's audit and the different recommendations that you don't agree with? What about those issues? How do we resolve that?
The last recommendation that initially we were not in agreement with was in regards to outreaching through electronic means. At the time the audit was completed, SMS did not have that functionality, but since then, Google has been implemented into the city resources, and we are exploring the functionality of Google to implement some sort of electronic outreach to all of the end users.
Okay. And one thing I'm tired of hearing is lack of resources. I have heard that, and my staff, I've told them, I guess you have to work a little harder. So this thing about lack of resources, I don't accept that. You got to work a little harder. And that's the bottom line as far as I'm concerned. If they don't want to work a little harder, maybe they go work someplace else. Because the taxpayers are fed up with the bickering in politics, with the fact that we say we can't do this, we can't do that. We have to work a little harder. That's the bottom line. If they don't want to work a little harder, then maybe they can go find another job. Because I'm sick and tired of this excuse. Not only your department, but every single department has the same excuse. There's been cutbacks, and it's going to continue because we don't have the funds. People should be happy they have a job. They have medical, they have dental, they have a pension, and they need to appreciate that. And if they don't, there's hundreds of people in line waiting to take those jobs. So this lack of resources, I do not accept that. My response is work harder. Yes, ma'am.
To clarify, it was the automated functionality with SMS. There wasn't an automated feature, but Google does now offer an automatic outreach feature that we are looking into. that was the resource.
Okay. Yes, sir.
A couple of things.
Now, who are you?
I'm Terry William Newman,
And you're with who?
with the City Controller's Office.
Okay. I haven't seen you, that's why I didn't know who you were.
Cynthia's my supervisor.
Okay. How's he doing, Cindy?
Very well.
All right. Okay, go ahead.
So I just comment first on the freight charge issue.
Yes.
Alfred Lopez is expressing facts about the council-controlled departments, but I'm not sure he's aware that we are in possession of documents that show that the proprietary departments, at least the Harbor Department, has also piggybacked the city contract as it had been incorrectly modified, and there were freight charges that were incurred at the Harbor in addition to what
Okay.
the $4,500 that Alfred was mentioning. On the subject of notification, just want us to all give a nod to Twitter and to other social media that lead the way in what a listserv is and how common it is for people to have a way to notify innumerable unknown people about a change to something like a contract.
Okay. So what I mean, this is all part of that. It's not abuse. It would be waste, in one example, charging us for freight charges that we shouldn't be paying for. That could be interpreted as fraud. And a $40 million contract, that's a whole lot of money. And it's a lifeline for our public safety personnel with the police department, fire department, general services, ITA. I mean, that communications is critical. In the event of a disaster, the event of everyday occurrence, the event you need help with a fire, paramedic, or police. So I understand the $40 million, which is a huge hit. And sometimes people say, well, it's only $40 million. With $4,500 or $5,000 or $10,000, no big deal. It's a huge deal. We can do a lot with that money, and I think we need to be more cognizant of that. So what we need to do, and that's why I say we go to Motorola, say, hey, this is it. Let's find out what the Harbor Department, let's find out the freight charges for all the departments, because the Harbor Department, while it's a separate entity, it's still part of the city family. We have fire department personnel that are signed to the Harbor. What about the LAWA? Was LAWA involved in this, of Motorola radios at all? Because we got the police department. The police department does have a connection with the airport police. Do we know if they were part of it or separate?
Our budget didn't allow us to do research into the proprietary departments, but it did come to our attention. I have a document that's showing that they paid $1,000 freight charge at the Harbor for one particular purchase. How extensive that was, I don't know.
Okay, but we need to find out the total overcharge for freight, and whatever we come up with, be very polite, very cordial. If we don't want to pay it, then thank you, let us know in this committee, and then we will take it forward.
Okay.
Mr. Englander.
Yeah, just a couple things. One, I wanted to recognize how hard you guys have been working. The fact that you did uncover the freight charges as well, and I appreciate what my colleague shared with you, but...
Did they uncover it, or did the controller uncover it?
Well, working with the controller's office.
Working with them, yeah.
Okay.
And working together. And then not only that is in the reports that I found, that you'd only gone through 3 invoices, and then to come back and prepare for this committee in advance, you went through all of them.
Mm-hmm.
And so you came prepared. You went through all of the reports. You discovered not the $1,000 from what was reported on 3 invoices, but over $4,500, and had gone through all of them. And so I appreciate that. I know it's a lot of work. There's a lot of pressure, particularly now during this financial crisis, to find things. And I know you guys are overworked, and it is tough, but we're all in this together. And so I just wanted to say I appreciate it, and thank you for that. I did have a question on, you'd said that the total procurement is, the contract was around $40 million, total goods and procurement was about $53 million. There was about $4 million, I think I made a note during your opening, of services that were not part of the contract. And I tuned in a little more to that. But what were the services that were not part of the contract that was roughly $4 million? Can you elaborate on that?
I don't have information on that, but I can look into that and report back.
Here comes the gentleman who may have the answer.
Somebody's stepping up. Here's the $4 million man. Did you bring cash? All right.
Ken Desowitz, General Services Department. Early in the contract, there were police stations that were being built and microwave systems that were being installed in those stations, and there was networking, design, and testing services that were believed to be part of the equipment purchase, and that's what's being described as inappropriate professional services.
Okay, so that was billed, but it wasn't part of the original.
No, it was part of the original contract and part of payments that were made to Motorola. They performed the services to create essentially turnkey systems, communication systems for new police stations.
Wouldn't that be in a separate contract, separate billing charge to the bond for the particular facility?
The contract was used as a vehicle to pay for those services.
But was it paid from the bond, or was it paid from?
I'm not sure what the funding source was. You'd have to ask the police department.
But the question is, on that $4 million that was discovered as not part of the actual hard cost, those were soft costs, if you will, or external cost outside of the equipment cost, those were...
Correct. It's true what we would call consulting services or design or engineering services that were performed by Motorola,
right,
to create and design turnkey communication systems for police stations.
But what you're saying is that was outside of the contract?
Now, what we're saying is the purchasing agent has authority to purchase equipment supplies for other departments.
But wouldn't that have been written into the RFP?
This was a cooperative purchase from an LA County contract that was mistakenly believed to include these professional services.
Okay, so...
And once it was determined that the services should not have been procured as part of the contract vehicle, there was an amendment done to exclude them.
But we already paid upwards of $4 million.
Correct.
When they weren't part of the original thought of the piggyback, where we would get and I guess the idea of the piggyback is for economies of scale.
Correct.
And so if we pool our resources, this sounds more like a diseconomies of scale.
Well, no, it was, well...
So if we jumped on a piggyback contract to purchase equipment, and then we were billed for the design and turnkey implementation of installing the actual equipment we were buying, that it wasn't believed that we needed to do that. I'm trying to figure out where things went wrong to the tune of $4+ million.
There were labor rates that were included in, this is what was known as a price catalog contract, which included a catalog of equipment.
I don't catalog shop, so you have to walk me through this.
Motorola produces a catalog which lists all the items that they sell, and we contract for a discount from that price catalog. Included in that price catalog of all the items they sell were also a listing of professional services. We have since excluded that section of the catalog.
So my question, so we go through this catalog, and it goes through all the purchasing processes, and we select, or general managers of departments may select, okay, we need 45 of these type of radios, 21 of which weren't FCC in compliance, but that's another issue. We'll table that for a second. And we needed 100 of these radios and whatever the equipment is. In that catalog also then is a separate item for the actual services. Do we put out a purchase order when we piggyback? So we fill out an actual purchase order that we generate, that's city generated?
Correct.
Okay.
The departments do. So in this case, I believe it would have been ITA and/or the police department.
Okay. So ITA and/or the police department submitted a purchase order for so much equipment out of the catalog, if you will, and did not put down on the PO.
No, they did. They would have indicated on the PO.
Service.
The indication for the equipment and the services.
And the services.
Yes.
So the city, in fact, ordered those services, but you're saying we shouldn't have? That's what I'm trying to figure out.
Council member, I might be able to clarify a little bit.
It's a bit confusing. Are you following this?
The way the contract worked, and I'm the independent type, who came in and put his nose under the tent door. From my perspective, the county had a contract. They were very specific. There are no services allowed under that contract. When the city piggybacked that contract, Motorola provided the city with an amendment or a document that says this is what the county contract says. But that document added the line services. And it was at that point that the county contract became, for the city, a contract for services. So it's hard to determine from our standpoint who in the city should have known that, but it would require that you go to the county and look at the county contract to detect this had been added to the contract.
Have we done that?
We did that as auditors.
And so was it added to the county contract?
It was never added to the county. The county does not allow services to be purchased under that Motorola contract.
So under that Motorola contract, services and/or freight were not to be billed, and they were all inclusive, if you will, under the catalog discount price for having said contract, correct? Just trying to...
That's correct in part. The Motorola catalog, the ECAT as it's called, the electronic catalog, has a whole list of things, and the county contract didn't allow the county to purchase all the items on that ECAT, only specific items.
But we piggybacked off of that saying...
So that means we would only be able to buy those specific
Right.
items.
That makes sense. So how were we in fact ordering and billed and paid things that were not allowed under that?
The county's contract is we piggyback it, and what we do when we piggyback it, what GSD does, is they set up something in our billing system, the SMS system, that says this is a piggyback of the county contract, and here's what the county contract says. And that statement now is what Motorola said the county contract says. So now the people in our city are reading this document that...
From Motorola, not from the county, from Motorola.
Exactly, from Motorola.
We said we're piggybacking on that, send us a copy of the same thing for the city to sign on, and they send it and added things to it that weren't part of the county.
Exactly right.
So while I'm mildly interested in the $4,000 freight charges, this is $4 million and doesn't include the proprietary departments that probably went through the same thing.
There you go.
What's Motorola saying about that?
We didn't pursue that legally with Motorola, but that is an issue.
Is there any, and maybe this is an item for closed session, but I think we ought to take it to the next level.
Is somebody here from Motorola? Is there a Motorola representative? I think what we need to do is continue this matter, have Motorola come forward to this committee and find out exactly what's going on. Because some of the questions we don't have answers to, and we want to bring Motorola forward. Have we paid the $40 million yet, or is there still money outstanding?
That's like $53 million.
On the original contract, have we...
All the services have been paid for.
Well, I know from
Equipment that's been ordered.
The $40 million contract, have we given them the $40 million yet? Or are they still paying? Are we still paying?
The contract is still in force, it's still valid, so...
I understand it's valid, but have we given them all the money? Or is there still money that we're holding back before they complete everything?
It's not
The contract...
one lump sum, $40 million job.
That's what I'm saying,
There's individual orders that are placed. The
Okay.
most significant order was
Can I make a
for...
recommendation?
Wait, so how much more do we owe them that we haven't paid them?
I don't know what the...
Okay, let's find that out. Let's bring Motorola here, and let's hash this out, and that way we can get the bottom line of it.
I'd like to make a recommendation to the chair, if I could.
Go ahead.
Is that on the next audits committee, we schedule it for a closed session item with our city attorney, hopefully a representative if there could come from Motorola, but at least also a copy of one of the documents showing where they added the services that were not part of what the contract allows, and explaining the piggyback scenario on how we're supposed to, the reason, I mean, the reason for having these type of piggyback contracts is because one entity, like the county or another city or whoever it might be, it's not just buying power and economies of scale, but it saves us from having to go through a full-blown RFP process, from saving tens of thousands of dollars in staff time. The whole idea is that they've already negotiated and followed all legal requirements of negotiation to get the lowest possible price. We find out that we want either something similar or the same in a service or product, and we say we want the ability to piggyback on that so we don't have to go through that whole process. And we've now even possibly lowered the per price piece per product because we've enhanced that contract with additional purchasing power. So the county then also gets the benefit. So we extend that to other city proprietary departments. That's the whole idea of these piggyback contracts. But if in fact the actual vendor is changing the relationship from entity to entity and adding other enhancements that weren't negotiated in part of the original contract, I think it goes back to the whole discussion of waste, fraud, and abuse, not by our city family, quite frankly. And it sounds like you guys were the ones that discovered this that need to be applauded. It wasn't, I don't believe it was Motorola that stepped up to say, oh, by the way, we inadvertently charged you freight and these contract services. So however this was discovered, it sounds like it came out of our city family. It's out of the controller's audits, and I applaud you guys for that. We've got to get to the next step now and find out how widespread it is and how much money it is. At a minimum, we know there's possibly well over $4 million, and that's just the beginning. So I would recommend a closed session item on this because it looks like a lot of it could be
That's fine. I have no
a
problem
legal
with closed
matter.
session. If the legal city attorney says it's closed session, it's closed session. If not, we need to get the resolve of this. So we have a lot of unanswered questions. We're not asking Motorola to come here. We're demanding that they come to this committee and make that in the most, I don't know if you, General Services does, or however, they need to be notified to come here. And we ought to know how much is outstanding on the $40 million. And the 2 police or 3 police stations, whatever, there's bond measures, and there's bond money that pays for it, and there may be a possibility they've been double billed on this through the bond measure, which they charged, and back on it. We need to get this thing clarified. So we'll continue it. Let's get confirmation that Motorola, let's bring you folks back. We will schedule this, when? 2 weeks? Pardon me? Okay, we'll do it a month from today. All right. So we'll continue item number 2 a month from today, which would be our second meeting after this. Okay, so that's to be the directive on number 2.
May I just clarify something?
Sure.
I want to make sure that you understand, it's not a $40 million contract, but it's a contract that allows us to use agreed-upon prices that are going to be charged to us. So various departments have been making individual purchases that have totaled up $40
Right.
million from 2003
Right.
through.
Oh, I understand that. Okay, that'll be it. Thank you very much. Yes, sir.
Let me just add about the services that were discussed. There's that line item I mentioned for services, and one of the egregious issues we saw was that it was that part of the purchase order that was prepared where when the vendor responds and says, this is how much we'll charge you, there isn't any price in the catalog for services.
Right.
It's how much they say it is, and we saw in the documentation that all they provided was one line, $400,000.
Yeah, for services. Well, again, new police stations, renovation stations is paid out of a bond, and it'd be interesting to see if we were double billed. If we were billed on this and also paid on the bond, which constructed, and there's bond money that was put aside for new stations and renovation stations, so we need to figure out that. And if we're getting double billed, that is total fraud, waste, and abuse, and someone should go to jail for ripping off the taxpayers. I'm only assuming, I'm not accusing. So anyway, that's it. Thank you. Number 3, please.
Item number 3, City Administrative Officer Report, Response to Motion, Zine, Cardenas, Garcetti, relative to cell phone use reductions.
Cell phone use. I pay for my own. How many does the clerk have today? Hi, Jim. I'm just teasing you. Okay, go ahead.
I'm Jacob Wexler with the Office of the City Administrative Officer, and item 3 is a report that we prepared in response to a motion introduced by the chair and as well as Councilmembers Cardenas and Garcetti, instructing our office to report on a council instruction for departments to reduce their cell phone numbers by 10%. There are all sorts of requests for our office to report on some of the impacts of those reductions. The CEO sent out a survey to city departments, and from the responses that we got back, when you compare the 9-10 numbers to 10-11, there's been a 12% reduction in the number of cell phones in city departments that responded, as well as a 13% reduction in the bills, cell phone bills.
The ones that responded, how many didn't respond?
I think we got about 2/3 of the responses back. We got 20 departments reported and about 11 additional that we would still be waiting for.
We want to get them all in.
I'm happy to continue to work with the departments, and we can come back with a full report from all the departments.
Okay.
We can do that. So the 10% target that was set by the council has been met, and we believe that just from some of the responses from departments that the cost, the cell phone bills, will probably continue to show additional reductions in the coming months because there's been a lot of work done by departments and with ITA as well as GSD to work with departments to make sure that everybody's on the lowest cost plans that are available. And it seems like some of those cost savings are just going to continue to grow as they're spread over an entire year because a lot of the changes were made towards the end of last fiscal year. So I think that whereas it may not be possible to have significant reductions in the number of cell phones from where we are now, I think the costs will probably continue to be reduced through the hard work of departments as well as IPA and GSD.
See, one thing that I find interesting is if you're out in the field, then I could see the need for a cell phone. But if you're the CLA, I don't understand why the CLA needs 11 cell phones, because the CLA works inside a facility which there's phones. The CAO, 17 cell phones. Why they need 17 cell phones when all their activities within buildings, they're not out in the field, they're not out meeting with constituents. Some of these departments, I question why they need a cell phone in the first place. If they want to have one, if they need to go out on an emergency, but I don't know what kind of emergency the CLA or the CAO is going to have. I mean, those departments do inside work. If you're in the field, I can understand the need, but some of these departments, I question the library department. Why does the library department need 28 cell phones? That doesn't really make sense. What are they doing? They're working the city facility. They have city phones. I find it interesting that ITA, 206 cell phones. That seems like a lot of cell phones for departments that have offices and personnel. They come to work, they do their job, they go to lunch, and they go home. These departments don't go in the field. Personnel don't go in the field. So I think the 2,509 cell phones that we have documented here, we need to question what the heck they need a cell phone in the first place.
Right, and the responses that we got back, there were, like you said, a number of employees who are, in fact, inspectors who spend their entire days in the field, a significant number of those. There's also top-level managers tend to have phones, or people who are on call. So, if you have departments where somebody is maybe they're home on the weekend, but you maybe need to get in touch with them to come in if there's a problem in the data center, an IT employee may be called to come in and respond. So there's some of employees that are kind of expected to be available to their management at all times, and those people are often given the city cell phones.
But 206 for ITA? There couldn't be that many folks that come in an emergency. CLA, and CAO. Even the city attorney, 81 cell phones for the city attorney. To me, those numbers, I would question. I can understand people who are in the field. I have no question about that. El Pueblo, what does El Pueblo need cell phones for? What would they need a cell phone for? Housing, 309 cell phones. Personnel, 33 cell phones. So, some of these departments that have huge numbers of cell phones, or even small numbers of cell phones. I mean, the city attorney was reduced from 139 to 81, but what do they need cell phones for? Their work is in a building, their work is in a courthouse, their work is in a city facility. If they need to make a call, then there's a phone available.
I think it's probably more to reach them when they're in meetings or so they can check email remotely. I think a lot of it is used for that, maybe less for the minutes. I think a lot of departments see it as an efficiency so that their people can kind of constantly be up to date with things that are going on at the desk when they're actually not at their desk, because, whereas the departments that you identified, we don't work in the field, we're not certainly always sitting at our desks. I don't have a cell phone, for city cell phone. But, those employees are spread throughout the city working, at different meetings before council, and their managers want to be able to get in touch with them, or they want to be able to get in touch with their staff.
Well, somebody want to get a hold of you right now, they know where you are, they can call this number, right?
Yeah, I don't have a city cell phone, but correct. They could call that number, but chances are they'd probably be sitting in the back of the room. I wouldn't be walking up there to talk on the...
Well, maybe we need to get realistic to say, how do we get a hold of folks? But I know police officers use their own cell phones. They pay for it themselves, other than the command staff and the senior lead officers. All the other people pay for their own cell phones, use their own cell phones. I pay for my own cell phone. You pay for your own cell phone?
I write a check back to the city every single month.
So you pay for your own cell phone. So I understand what we're saying, but we're talking about a huge amount of money. And then the other question is, are we getting the best deal, which is a whole nother controversial situation. So 20 departments reported relative to the motion and instructions. We have a whole lot more departments that we need to hear from. We want every single department to report it. I mean, this committee has a responsibility to make sure things are done proper, and we're going to make sure they're done proper. And it's not just, well, we don't want to report back. And if we have to go to the mayor's office and have the general manager come in and explain it, then we'll do that. But this isn't a committee that sits there and says, okay, thank you very much. So we need to get all the departments to comply. There's obviously been a reduction, 12%, which is good. Expenditures reduced by 13%, which is good, or approximately $200,000, which is a lot of money. So what we want to do is continue on this trend, and we want to continue this matter and get these other departments to comply. We're not going to move it forward. Okay? Otherwise, we lose it. How many departments do we have in the city right now?
I think, how many departments total? There's around 40, but there is a few that were exempted from the motion. I think we're waiting for maybe 10 to 15 or something.
Okay, so let's continue this item. You have any questions before we continue it?
Just one minor question. In where it says building and safety reduced by 61, they came to this committee, the last committee, and reported that they're going to buy all new cell phones with data, GPS tracking systems, and to spend, I don't remember the exact amount.
A fortune.
A lot of money. Well, I think it was about $200,000 on the new GPS tracking system, so they can actually audit and track where their inspectors are because of the inspectors and the FBI probes. And I think there's something to be said about cell phones as well. We've got to tighten our belt. I don't know that it's the raw number or who has them. I think a lot of it goes back to who has them, but the type of data plans that are out there. If an employee leaves service, whether through retirement or other means, that we've in fact located their cell phone and disconnected it immediately, so we're not paying for those phones that aren't being used or transferring them to other employees. But I think the statement you made earlier needs to be shared publicly, and that is, and you sort of glazed over it, but I think you were making a good point, whether it's a personal cell phone or a city cell phone, because we expect a lot out of our employees. And this is no longer a 9-to-5 job. It's no longer an 8:30 to 5 job. I can tell you right now that I can pick up the phone 24 hours a day and call Frank Bush, for example, from Building and Safety, and he answers it. Saturday, Sunday, in the afternoon, I got an issue in our district, he answers the phone, his cell phone. And I can say that for a lot of city staff and a lot of employees. Not only are they responsive 24 hours a day, but they're responding to emails at all hours of the night. I know that Mr. Zine calls me at all hours of the night, which is scary. That's another story. But the idea that we are living in a different world, that it's not just about cell phone reduction, but looking at policies on who should have them. Are they responsive? Are they set up to the city system and responding to emails? I mean, a lot of people are working a lot harder. We have 4,000 less employees than we did a couple years ago. We're looking at a $200 million budget deficit going into the next fiscal year. And we're going to be requiring our staff and employees to work harder and work smarter, which means that they're going to be tethered more often, quite frankly, away from their desks. And we want them to respond to not only to us and to supervisors, but to our constituents, to businesses, to be more business friendly. I got a call coming in right now from, Dennis Zine, see? Always on alert. But I think the point of that is we need to look at the policies. We need to look and make sure that we're shopping around for the best prices in terms of the data plans, and that employees aren't abusing the text plans and things like that. I think that's really what needs to be asked, not just about the idea of cutting 10%, which to me is some arbitrary number, quite frankly. I don't know what 10% means. I think it makes more sense to think about who are we cutting, do they really need them, and are we requiring more of our staff, of our employees to work around the clock, and that's what cell phones do. And so those employees that do respond all hours of the night on the weekends, that do respond to emails, that do answer their cell phones, they don't shut them off at 5 o'clock, I applaud them and say, we're not necessarily paying them overtime to respond to emails, to do things like that. And so I want to recognize that as well and look at the policy aspects of this, not just a number that's pulled out of the air. So, and you mentioned it, and so I wanted to echo that. I appreciate that. Thank you.
And what it says here is justification for cell phone issuance is lacking. Most cost-effective plan is not selected. Unnecessary cost incurred for directory assistance, call forwarding, etc. Most departments do not effectively prohibit personal calls or seek reimbursement. So there is a huge issue. I don't have any problem if the department needs it for a justified reason, but I would question why the CAO and the CLA need cell phones. When you ever get called on the weekends?
Do I get called on the weekends? I'll reiterate again that I do not have
duty-related activities on the weekends?
I respond to emails on the weekends.
I didn't say that.
I come to work sometimes on the weekend.
Cell phone.
I don't have a city cell phone, but if my boss were to call me on the weekend, I certainly would answer the phone.
Who's your boss?
Miguel Santana is my boss.
Okay. Well, I've called Miguel Santana a couple times.
Does he answer?
Well, I don't want to say where he was.
He actually does answer, but he's got caller ID, so he answers for me, but perhaps not the chairman.
Anyway, so obviously it's $1.5 million, which is a lot of money, and we just want to make sure it's righteous, it's justified. So let's get those other departments to give you the information. We want to have them comply. And if they don't, then we'll have the general managers come forward and do that. So we will continue this till when? You want a month, 2 months? What do you want?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Are we buying our cell phones from Motorola? No,
Pardon
I'm
me?
kidding, I already know.
How about a month?
We'll do this as quickly as we can. But I think a month certainly is.
Okay.
We'll shoot for that.
All right, good, thank you. Let's go to number 4, please.
Item 4, City Controller Report relative to citywide cell phone usage. City Clerk Report response to said City Controller Report.
All righty, you're back again.
I am back again. Cynthia Varela with the Controller's Office. I'll give you a brief overview of the report and the general findings. So our audit of citywide usage of cell phones was issued May 11th, 2011, and our audit objectives, our primary audit objective was to assess the efficiency and effectiveness of the city's oversight and management of cell phone usage. And when we use the term cell phones, we're including smartphones like BlackBerries and also push-to-talk phones. We evaluated the department's processes for establishing appropriate criteria for determining which employees need cell phones, so looking at the business need, monitoring cell phone usage for appropriate business usage and reducing unauthorized or excessive cell phone costs, determining which cell phone contracts and phone plans provide maximum value for its business needs based on cell phone usage, and identifying and collecting reimbursement from employees for personal calls. We looked at phone bills generally from June 2010 through October 2010 for the carriers that we had contracts with. The audit focused on 7 departments. We selected ones with the highest cell phone costs, as well as including some of our smaller departments. The 7 departments included the Office of the City Clerk, Cultural Affairs Department, Department of Building and Safety, General Services Department, Information Technology Agency, Los Angeles Police Department, and Public Works Bureau of Sanitation. The city spent approximately $4.8 million in fiscal year 09-10 and $3.2 million through February 2011. Based on self-reported information from city departments, there were approximately 6,500 city-issued cell phones for council-controlled departments. Cell phone management is decentralized to individual departments, which means the departments determine who should be issued a cell phone, which plan to select, how to monitor usage, and whether to make changes to phone plan selections. Overall, we found that the city cannot be assured that the number of cell phones assigned to employees is justified and necessary for city business. Our key findings included departments assigned cell phones without initially or periodically confirming there is an appropriate business need. Based on a sample of 174 cell phone assignments, we noted that over half lacked a detailed and specific cost-benefit justification supporting the business need for the phone. We identified 563 cell phones that had zero usage for 2 or 3 consecutive months at a total cost of $46,000 in recurring charges, which lends itself to say, is there a business need for those phones if they're not being used for that period of time? We also identified phones that were assigned to terminated employees. We noted 3 phones within GSD. Either they were, the employees, had terminated or transferred to another department. There were 3 phones in GSD, 3 in LAPD. We also did a comparison for 2 of the carriers' billing data with Pacer, and we identified about 50 phones that had been assigned to terminated employees. Second finding, we noted some departments did not adequately monitor cell phone usage to determine the most cost-effective phone plan. Additionally, unnecessary cell phone costs were incurred for extra charges such as directory assistance, call forwarding, and other services. We identified total text charges that exceeded $22,000 for phones with monthly charges that exceeded $20 and in some cases exceeded $100. And this goes to monitoring whether you're in the right plan or not, since there are data plans or text plans, that can be substantially less. In another case, we identified international calling plans being added for a monthly charge, even though international travel only occurred a few times. For July through September 2010, over $28,000 in extra charges had been incurred. Next finding, the city lacked centralized oversight of cell phone contracts, and departments did not ensure that cell phone carriers complied with the optimization contract provision. GSD administers the contracts because it's a service, and IT or commodity, and ITA provides the support as the technical expert, but neither department really provided oversight of the contracts or provides guidance to departments on how to minimize costs. Again, this goes back to the decentralized process that's being followed by the city. The city's contracts require the carriers to routinely notify users if they're not in the most optimized plan. We found that only 4 of the departments, GSD, ITA, LAPD, and Department of Building and Safety, had indicated they received optimization reports from their carriers. The projected savings ranged from 7.89% to 21%. If these savings are reflective of what could have been achieved citywide, potentially the city could have experienced savings from a low of $375,000 to as much as $998,000. To date, we have action plans from all 7 departments. The most recent action plan was from the Cultural Affairs Department, which we received on September 13th. Generally, we found the action plans acceptable from the departments, although in some cases we required clarification to ensure that the action plans addressed the recommendations. There were 10 recommendations that were directed to department GMs. There was 1 recommendation addressed to the mayor's office and then 4 specifically to ITA. With regard to the city clerk, since their response was addressed to the committee, based on the city clerk's responses, 3 of the recommendations we consider implemented, 6 are in progress, and the office disagrees with one of the recommendations, which is establishing a policy to prohibit the personal use of city-issued cell phones. In our evaluation of this, one of the things that we acknowledge is that there is an administrative burden on the departments to distribute the cell phone bills to the users, to have them identify any personal calls, and then to submit a reimbursement. There's a lot of time and effort that goes into that, collecting those checks, depositing those checks. And as a way of mitigating some of that time, one of the recommendations that we addressed to the ITA department was to develop a citywide policy on more cost-effective options for the city, and that including looking at establishing maybe tiered stipends that would be paid to employees that still having a justified business need for getting that stipend, that they needed to be contracted. But it would eliminate that burden of identifying personal calls. During our audit, we identified other jurisdictions that have implemented stipend policy and to pay for the business use of the cell phone. And we did a recent internet search. We found even more municipalities. In our report, we identified, just an example, two, Dayton, Ohio, and then Roanoke, Virginia, that had implemented the stipend policy. But we've identified even more jurisdictions in this year that have implemented that practice. So the department's action plans and our evaluations are posted on the controller's website as we've received them. So.
Thank you. So we went from 4.8 million to 3.2 million, 6,500 cell phones. Now that's only the council control. That doesn't include airport, harbor.
That's correct.
Or the port, airport, harbor, or water and power.
Right.
Well, I don't want to note and file this. I think that there's still an issue. You did a few of the departments, 7, I think you said.
Yes.
There's about 40 departments, and I still go back to the question of how do they justify, and they don't justify. It just has a matter of, you know, when a cell phone is kind of like, here it is, and we're spending millions of dollars, that we really question the justification. Some of the comments that are here echo our feelings on the justification or lack of justification. And it just seems to be part of the process whether that department can justify. I can see for emergency purposes, but some of the departments that have extensive numbers of cell phones, especially when the people work inside city facilities, they don't go out in the field for the most part. They're in a city office, in an office building where they have phone use. And if they go out to lunch and have to make a call, it's probably not a business-related call. So I really think that there's more that we can do to squeeze more dollars out of this and to tighten the rein on the issuance of city cell phones. The stipend, I think, is a good idea. They justify it. It's like we give them the money up front. With the stipend, they have to justify that expenditure for a city business, for those departments that really don't have personnel in the field.
Right. The idea was that based on historical usage, what was the business usage of the cell phone, and determining what amount would be a reasonable amount to cover that. And sometimes it may not cover it, but.
Yeah, but I don't think the way it's working, even though it's been cut from 4.8 million to 3.2 million, I think they're projecting another deficit in the city budget, if I'm reading the news correctly. They were faced with another deficit, which means more cutbacks, maybe more people not employed. I think we need to explore more into this arena of cell phones. Number one would be justification. Which departments actually really need cell phones? And when you look at the number of cell phones issued, and the fact that some departments had cell phones that weren't even used, that's another expenditure of waste. So I'm not happy to send this forward. Mr. Englander, some comments from you?
I wasn't familiar with the other municipalities that were paying a stipend in lieu of a cell phone. So I'd like to see something on that. So thanks for discovering that and looking at best practices. One of the things that we recently did in our office was we identified anybody who had a personal cell phone and asked them to opt into a Google voice number. Several did, and turned in their city cell phones, shut them off, and created a separate Google voice phone number, which is free, and you can have now your cell phone It's $20 if you pay the international, if you want to make international calls on it. If you don't do that, it's free for all local calls. You can have a customized number on it, but more importantly, every BlackBerry, in fact, every cell phone, it doesn't even have to be a smartphone, can have 2 phone numbers on it now. A Google Voice number, which is free, and your regular phone, personal phone number on it. You can call out of either number if you have a Google Voice number for free. And so those with caller ID, if you don't want them to have your personal phone number, you can do that. And if you have a smartphone, you can now, because of our Google's taken over the world. If you are Google, if you have a smartphone, you can log on to your email, your city email, for free off your data plan as well, either from home or a smartphone, because of the new system we have on our email system, except for, I think, LAPD is not there yet.
They'll never go on there.
And so with that, I would ask actually more city staff and employees to look into that, look into those free type of phone numbers like Google, which works extremely well, where you can have a free phone number on your existing personal cell phone and turn in your phone, knowing that we're faced with a $200 million deficit. And just by doing so, if we're looking at $6.3 million in cell phone expenditures between 2008 and 2009, that's a lot of jobs that we can retain in the city family as well to provide those critical services just for turning in a cell phone. So I would urge people to get that message out as well.
So let's look at the stipend and how that could be a formula. Also, why anyone would use a city cell phone for international call. I really question why they'd use a cell phone other than for personal reasons. Because we are not doing international business for most departments, and if you're going to do it, you do it through the phone that you have in your office, which is a whole nother ballgame of expenses.
Yeah, and this was a department that actually the executive staff did travel outside of the country, and so this enabled them to stay in touch.
Well, we have a motion about travel, national, international, and how we need to save money so we don't spend money and lay off more employees. Because that's the bottom line. We're going to start laying off more people and more furloughs unless we can tighten our belt. And as Mr. Englander said, $200,000 is the projection for the next deficit. So that's a few people aren't be getting a paycheck. So let's continue this matter and come up with some other options. Justification. I think every single department needs to justify what the cell phones are used for. And the audit showed, without initially or periodically confirming there is an appropriate business need, some of these departments, I really question why they need a cell phone. If they want to have one for an emergency, but to have a number of them when they're assigned inside of a building at a desk, I question why they need a cell phone. So I don't think it justifies 11,791, 6,500 cell phones in council-controlled departments. I mean, that's an incredible number of cell phones. I know they're used by kids and adults and everything in between for personal reasons, but this is what the taxpayers are paying for. So let's explore some of the other options, and let's find out what we can do to reduce the numbers. In addition to the reducing expenditures, reduce the number of cell phones and shut them down. At one time, we had a whole bunch of 800 numbers, and we've reduced that thanks to Controller Grew, who was a council member. There were a whole bunch of 800 numbers we had, some used, some not used. But there's so many of these activities out there. It's like you open the door, and you have all these cobwebs, and you go through, you find another door with more cobwebs, and you find more cobwebs. And we do it every time in this committee. We find more and more cobwebs. And the controller brings these issues forward. We're not going to ignore them. We're going to move forward. And the bottom line is stretching our resources to pay the bill. So 6.3 million to 4.8 million, it's a tremendous amount of money that we need to bring down to a lower level. So we'll continue this item for how long? As we continue to explore ways to cut the cell phone numbers and cell phone use. What do you think? 45 days? Mr. England, as we conclude?
Adjourned.
Thank you very much.